So I guess we can just start off, if you want to just tell me a bit about yourself and how you got into this Bigfoot thing initially.
Okay, my name is John Bindernagel. I'm a wildlife biologist, and I got into this, in third year university in Guelph, University of Guelph, Ontario, when I saw, I guess it was True Magazine, which was part of the problem. I'm presenting to my classmates and to the professor a report of an ape man from True Magazine. I think it's 1959, because this was 63, and they laughed. And I thought, oh shucks, I was pretty idealistic in those days. I said, well, can't we even talk about this? Well, apparently we couldn't. No, it was scientifically taboo then. And the amazing thing is that it's still, as I see it, still scientifically taboo now. But it got my interest up, and there was very little information available in those days. But then John Green's books came out in the late 60s and early 70s, and that was very, very helpful. Here are all these reports, and here are all these track casts that he's describing and illustrating. So that was an interest, but I didn't get to follow up on it for years until 1975 when we moved out here. And then in 1987 we actually cast some tracks. There's an original here, I think, right here on Vancouver Island. So from then on I had a track cast on my desk. So that was pretty interesting. My biggest problem, especially, I'm running out of time. I said, well, we're all running out of time, but I feel I'm running out of time a little faster than younger people. And I'm thinking, I think we wildlife biologists have dropped the ball. I mean, we're not examining these track casts. We're not considering the tracks. We're not considering the reports. We're not filing the reports that are coming in. And to me, this is very unprofessional. And sure, I've been doing it, and Jeff Meldrum, of course, has been doing it as an anatomist and anthropologist down there in the U.S., and Grover Krantz before us, but that's very few scientists that have really taken this seriously and said, gee, there's something here of significant scientific interest, and we, as scientists, have an obligation to try and make sense of it and provide informed comment for the public. And I don't want to sound self-righteous, but to me that doesn't sound that complicated. But there's been this thing with my colleagues, it's as if they've got blinders on to exclude this type of evidence. And, well, I think it's bizarre is what I think it is. Because the evidence is so good.
So right now, Bigfoot, it's quite popular, like on TV and in the news.
Apparently.
Do you think that there's a direct relationship between the popularity of it and a lot of reports that are coming out these days?
No, see, I don't know about the popularity. I don't, the mass media, the way it's been treated in the mass media, I have to ignore it or I just get too upset because there's all this misunderstanding about, well, first of all, just using the name Bigfoot, is kind of trivializes the whole subject. And, some of the TV programs, have been kind of entertainment oriented. And so our research is, again, kind of dismissed or discounted or misrepresented. So we don't go out in the bush thinking that every sound is a Sasquatch, that every broken branch is caused by a Sasquatch, that every depression in the soil is part of a Sasquatch track. No, we don't do that. We're really quite conservative, quite cautious. And so it's distressing. The popularizing has, everyone is, not everyone, there's a lot of expeditions going on, and it's fine, it's good. And I don't fault the amateur investigators because they're filling that vacuum which scientists have left. I mean, gee, I sure wish my colleagues would be coming alongside and providing guidance and instruction and some ideas, but they're not. So that's why I said, well, I can't fault people who are doing their very best as weekend investigators.
Do you feel that we're close to finding solid proof of its existence? And if so, how close do you think we are?
Well, I don't know. My first book was called North America's Great Ape. A wildlife biologist examines North America's most misunderstood large mammal. So that was my take in, excuse me, in 1998. It's just simply a misunderstood large mammal, and I still feel that way. Then the second book, which I just finished in 2010. I called it The Discovery of the Sasquatch, Reconciling Culture, History, and Science in the Discovery Process. And my point is that the Sasquatch has been discovered, actually, but that the discovery has not yet been acknowledged. So what we have with this kind of strange situation that people keep discovering the Sasquatch for himself or herself when they see one, but of course they're observing a mammal which is not supposed to exist. You know, they usually pack around a field guide to the mammals. You know, nowadays if you saw a Sasquatch, you'd come home and Google it, but not so long ago we'd come home and go through a mammal book and say, it's not there. And how can scientists have missed 7 foot tall, 600-pound upright mammal? Well, it hasn't been missed. It's been ignored. It's been pushed aside. It's been dismissed, and that's what I find so distressing. So discovery. I mean, sometimes I talk about the unfolding discovery process, and that's more acceptable, I guess. Other times I say, no, it's been discovered. We've got track evidence, film evidence, lots of eyewitness reports and drawings, and the vocalizations I'm starting to study now. And I think we're actually seeing Sasquatch sign, but not recognizing it as that. Some of these structures and these nests and modified trees. It's just so hard to attract, foresters to the modified trees, my biologist colleagues to the tracks.
Okay, so just tell me about some of your research and projects that you've conducted in the past and maybe what you're working on now.
Well, I follow up reports, when some come to my attention, I follow up, and it's always interesting to me as a biologist. Okay, people claim to have seen a Sasquatch, and I don't doubt people the way some others. I mean, it usually takes them quite a while to come forward and say, you won't believe this, but this is what I saw. And I'm saying, well, actually, I've heard enough reports and, seen enough drawings and things that I probably do believe it. But I'm interested in seeing where you saw it. And then I try to figure out why would it be there. Is it a great wildlife area? Is it a wetland or a seashore with maybe a clam beach or something like that, or a salmon stream? Or is it just sort of normal second growth conifer forest, which we have so much of around here, coniferous forest? In which case, maybe it's just passing through. But then there's these reports that, it's been carrying a deer, or it's been digging shellfish. Now those are really interesting, because we actually we have started building a bit of an ecological profile, how it behaves, what it eats. And the behavior reports are so interesting, when people report stone throwing, and loud branch breaking, the wood knocks, that sort of thing. I think, okay, there's some consistency here. We're getting a sense of how this animal tries to intimidate people. Sometimes, maybe try to repel them from an area, and a bit about what it eats and how it lives.
What kind of environments do you think it would most frequent, or are all the reports kind of really fanned out, or are they concentrated in a certain type of environment?
Yeah, there's a really strong correlation with water, creeks, rivers, wetlands, and especially ocean shores. The coast of BC, and this is what distresses me here in British Columbia, that my professional biologist colleagues will not take it seriously when here in British Columbia we probably have the best Sasquatch habitat on the planet. Well, maybe Southeast Alaska, BC, and Washington, but and down into Oregon and out Northern California still. But really good here on the coast. And of course, there's the tradition of the Sasquatch in Aboriginal culture. As Zunaqua, the wild woman of the woods, which so frequently is dismissed as supernatural or mythical in the sense of exclusively mythical, rather than saying, okay, it occurs in myth. Maybe there's a kernel of truth to that myth that warrants some investigation. And then there's lots of what I call historical accounts, and they go back into the 1800s, which have languished, So the early historical accounts, okay, it was described as a monster, and people didn't know what to do. And sure, cataloging is a problem, it seems to be a primate, which includes both apes and humans. And I used to be, I would say, insistent on it being an upright great ape, but I thought that was a really good hypothesis. But that seems to repel a lot of investigators who say, oh, no, this is no ape, this is definitely human. Well, rather than get bogged down in that distinction at this point, I like to just say, well, it's a primate, which includes everything, or even an anthropoid, that sort of thing, apes and humans, something like that. But there's this wall, this blockage, and this is where I think we have to be careful about being conservative with the accounts, not overstating the case, and very careful about documenting evidence. If there's a track, it really needs to be photographed and preferably cast, because from then on you have something to examine. But if it's just a report of, oh, this really big track, it's hard to do anything with that.
So based on your research of Sasquatch, can you explain the physical appearance of one of these animals to me?
Yeah, and I did that in the second book, and we've got some really good eyewitness drawings that have been provided for us, and a lot of them are big adult males. The wide shoulders, the really deep chest. They all seem to have the long arms. That's a pretty consistent thing. The very thick neck, sometimes a somewhat pointed head. Some are described as females because breasts are seen or because it's been seen carrying an infant. Others seem to be young adults or sub-adults, and these are much more human-like in their proportions, but still usually that thick neck and the long arms. But, and then, we actually have, descriptions of the face, a very wide mouth, thin lips, a very wide upper lip. A tendency, and there's a little controversy on the nose, whether it's the human type nose with downward facing nostrils or more of a flat gorilla-like nose, and we seem to hear both. Eyes seem to be deep set, brow ridges sometimes described, a receding forehead rather than a sharp one like ours, a rounded jaw rather than the sharp jaw of modern humans. So there's a lot of detail. And then the hair covering, usually complete hair covering, usually dark, but often reddish brown.
This question might sound kind of silly, but because on the Earth, there's different kinds of humans in different countries, do you think it could be based on different areas?
Oh, variation.
Might look different?
Yeah. The dimorphism, it's talked about, and you like, almost like you've seen one black bear, you've seen them all, and you could have a drawing of a black bear and say, well, that's just a black bear. They're all very much the same. In primates, you get all this variation, and just like in humans, you get a lot of variation. Genuine races in the physical sense. It's a fact with different anatomical characteristics, and I think of Jane Goodall's work on chimpanzees. She could recognize individuals and they varied a lot. So in primates, you do get a lot of variation. So that's a good point. We're simply maybe talking about a range in like facial features.
Do you think that Sasquatch are more kind of lone beings, or do you think they're more kind of like family oriented and have like a structure? I know a lot of like chimpanzees and other primates kind of have like a family structure.
Yeah.
Do you think? What do you?
So many Sasquatch reports seem to be single individuals, especially males. There's a few reports of small groups of female with young, occasionally a larger group. It doesn't seem to have the social structure of like troops, like chimpanzees or bands. So the model, if it works, and I think it's the best model we have, is the orangutan. We have a male and female together in what they call a consortship for mating, and then the male goes off as a solitary individual again, and the female and young remain together. And I think that's might be the sort of situation we have here. I mean, it'd be nice, to be at the point when we could talk about that, because. And I don't want to speculate, because people say, well, it comes to Sasquatch, it's all speculation. No, it isn't. We actually know a great deal. But there's a temptation to sometimes speculate when we shouldn't. But that's a really fertile area for investigation, I think.
Do you believe that they're nocturnal?
It seems that Sasquatches do occur they're more active at night. They seem to be very active at night, but then there's lots of diurnal daytime sightings as well. So that's another good one. But I mean, I have a colleague, Henner Fehrenbach, and he made a good point that so many Sasquatches are seen in the headlights of cars. And since with a car, we're really illuminating a very small portion of the environment, that it suggests they're traveling quite a lot at night. Yeah, I think sometimes Sasquatches make mistakes, and they're seen, in an open field or crossing a highway, and I don't think we need to jump to the conclusion that, oh, this highway's good habitat because that's where it was seen. No, it was made a mistake. But it would be interesting when that happens is to look for good habitat nearby.
Do you have any theories as to why they want to be so elusive and don't want to be found?
You know, the Sasquatch is definitely elusive, but on the other hand, every once in a while they do blunder into the open and even into campsites, and and just stand there for minutes for people to observe them. And they seem to sense if there's a threat or not. I think they're probably elusive around hunters, less so with children and campers. And there are these reports of children almost having Sasquatches as playmates, and one doesn't want to go too far in that direction because oh my goodness, these folks really are delusional. But one day we will kind of explore that kind of, I think it's a sense of kinship that they detect, fellow primates, and checking out to see if it's a safe place. And some of these habituation studies that have gotten to a certain point where people have maybe left food out on a regular basis, or just shown themselves to be benign people working on their land and not a threat, and they see Sasquatches from time to time. I don't know about territoriality. Like the thinking in biology is that a lot of mammals have a home range, and you can have overlapping home ranges, and part of that home range might be defended as a territory, and a territory can be movable. The territory might be based on a female with a young being defended by that female or by a male, and when the young is more fully grown or they move off, that's no longer defended, or it might be a food source. And yeah, there is this indication that there is maybe territoriality, especially when Aboriginal people talk about at certain clam beaches, they get stones thrown at them from the adjacent shoreline. And like here on the BC, parts of the BC coast in Kwakwaka'wakw country, they say, well, this is Bukwas or Zunaqua, and they know what it is, and they say, okay, we should leave, and at least that's the way it used to be anyway. And there's a little less understanding now, I think, because it's interesting, even in the Aboriginal community where I'm working right now, I find that, a lot of the younger people are very skeptical that it's a real existing mammal, even though the elders are saying, oh no, we've seen it, we've heard it, we've seen the signs, we've had stones thrown at us, so we know. But yeah, well, I'm really interested in my next presentation. I kind of want to defend the Aboriginal representation of the Sasquatch, because they've really shared a lot with us. They've there's an old report, it's from a Hudson's Bay trader talking about Aboriginal people in northern Saskatchewan, saying they persuade themselves that they see its tracks in the moss or snow. Well, they don't have to persuade themselves. We do have great photographs of tracks in snow, and sometimes in moist snow, so that they're very, very sharp, as good as some of these tracks we see in mud. So, but there's been this dismissal of Aboriginal reports because there is a spiritual element, and we just fail to understand that, okay, if it's attributed with supernatural attributes, that doesn't necessarily dismiss it from also being an actual living mammal. And because just like its presence in myth and legend doesn't mean that it's not actually real as well. I mean, there's beavers in myth and legend, and orcas, and otters. Anyway.
So what kinds of evidence have you found and acquired from being out in the field?
Well, myself, we were lucky to find tracks, good tracks, back in 1987, and that's the best. And then other people have found tracks and cast them, and we have some very nice examples of that right here on Vancouver Island and elsewhere. And for me as a biologist, the track casts are the best of evidence. I mean, we need to pull it all together, you know, and say, okay, we have the descriptions, and we've had descriptions of the feet, and it's sometimes described as a broad foot. Well, and that's a sort of a consistent feature, that the Sasquatch foot isn't just an expanded version of the human foot, but it tends to be a very broad foot, broader proportionally than the human. So I think that's good. The eyewitness drawings, you know, the Patterson-Gimlin film, I tend not to raise myself just because, you know, it's been dismissed as a hoax, and the feeling is, well, if we can debunk that film, we've debunked the Sasquatch. No, and it's been treated as a centerpiece of evidence. And I'm saying it's very good, but there's so much more than that. We shouldn't get hung up on that, so that kind of the existence of the Sasquatch stands or falls on a single piece of evidence. And that's why I'm getting quite interested in the vocalizations, you know, just because when people describe them, they're saying, oh my goodness, you know, this was no dog, this was no wolf, this was amazing, you know. And we have some recordings already, good ones. But it's so hard to attract the relevant scientists to this evidence, because you mention the name Sasquatch or Bigfoot, and it drops off the list, or gets very low on the list, or people are nervous, you know, because there's been hoaxes. So I don't want to get caught out in a hoax, you know, and so there's just this unwillingness for scientists to examine the evidence, which is really unfortunate.
Do you have any tips for whoever's going to be watching this if they ever want to go out and look for evidence or research Bigfoot?
Well, I mean, and I have drawings in here, you know, of an upright bear, field guide drawings, and an upright Sasquatch. And just considering that the Sasquatch is an option, that people who see a bear walking on its hind legs for a quarter of a mile maybe should look a little more closely and make sure that it is a bear. See if it does have the prominent snout, or rather has the flat face of a Sasquatch, and check it if it has shoulders, things like that. So it's that openness which a lot of people do have, more and more. Unfortunately, I don't see my scientific colleagues in that group yet, and I wish they would show that openness and willingness to examine the evidence. But I've said that before. But yeah, I mean, if there are tracks, photographing, and of course including scales. People often forget to include scale, and not their fault, but sure, it's nice to have a good photograph of just dropping a $5 bill or something like that in a credit card, something in there that of known size, so we have scale in the photograph. And then it's a real hassle, but gee, if it's a good track, actually casting it, because casts are just so compelling. I mean, I can hold this one up here, you know, it's just a great cast. It's from Washington State, cast by a deputy sheriff who knew he was looking at really good casts, and so he's got these beautiful arched toes, because it was nice, and it's considered one of the best tracks ever cast. So, but you know, and you know, I remember people say, "Oh, we don't need any more casts." Yeah, yes, we do, because there's a range, and we learn something from almost every one, and it's. That's kind of a joke. Hard evidence, you know. I mean, but it is physical. Well, some people would say it's physical evidence. Correctly, it's called trace evidence. It's trace left by something, sign left, not trace in the sense of minor, but trace in that it's something left behind. But I think it's pretty helpful in trying to get a discussion going, even though it hasn't worked with a lot of scientists yet.
How do you feel about a Sasquatch being killed to prove that it's a real creature?
Well, you know, like when did I go to university? Back in the '60s. You know, and in those days, one collected specimens. It was not a controversial issue at all. Ornithologists went around with a shotgun and fine bird shot and collected skins and made skins, and it's just what was done. Well, then, you know, we've gone into a different period, saying no, there's no need to collect anymore. You know, sometimes say photographs are good enough, but then in the Sasquatch, the photograph is not good enough. Casts are not good enough. So I'm not proposing that we collect one. There may be an accidental. I mean, obviously, my scientific colleagues would like to see a type specimen, but no one wants to advocate going out to collect one. Like we had one colleague, Grover Krantz, Washington State University, who said we need to collect one, and then we just put an end to this, and all the rest will become protected. Well, gee, he just took so much flack for that position. So, I mean, no one's going to say collect one. We kind of maybe hope, not hope for a type specimen. We hope that if there is an accidental roadkill or something, that specimen will become available for scientific examination. My point is that, okay, we don't have a type specimen. You know, if there were a type specimen, we'd have a completely different type of conversation. Can we not, in the absence of a type specimen, at least discuss the evidence and the very strong possibility that the Sasquatch does exist and that it is responsible for the tracks that we're seeing and the images that are appearing on film and the descriptions and the stones that are being thrown and some of the branch twisting that we're seeing? And I'm not asking for acceptance, but I am asking for scientific scrutiny of the evidence. I think that if we could just get to that point, it would be very healthy, much healthier than I think the present situation.